Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, okay, so it's a bit of a grim bank holiday Monday, so what better time to actually share some wonderful whiskies with you. Not that I need an excuse of a grim bank holiday Monday to share whiskey with you, but you know, it's what it is, as they say. Anyway, so this week I'm going to kick off the whole A to Z of Scottish distilleries, which may or may not be run from A to Z. There may well be odd episodes in between, you know, various things kind of crop up over time, but I'm going to try and do an A to Z, you know, and it'll probably take several months, but we'll get there eventually anyway, and then we just start again because there's so many different distilleries. I suppose you will. Obviously, you can tell by the title pick that today we're starting with Ardbeg. I mean, it's kind of an easy choice, I suppose, and I suppose I could have gone for a slightly more esoteric distillery, a bit less well-known distillery, but hell, I had 6 Ardbeg samples, and I love Ardbeg, so, and I know a lot of people do as well, so I thought, well, why not, you know. All these 6 samples were entered for this year's World Whisky Awards, and so, you know, I've got plenty, and you know, I've done an episode of the show, I think I've even done 2, I think, on Ardbeg over the years, so no need really for any waffle. I'll just introduce this afternoon's interesting little lineup. Right, okay, so we'll kick off with the classic standard 10-year-old bottled at 46%. And see where that is at this current moment in time. Next bottling we'll be looking at is, I think the bottling was released for last year, 2014's Ardbeg Day, the Auravedes, which I think is named after the Brazilian football team or something of that ilk anyway. Aged in American oak, which I think had specially toasted end pieces to the cask, end staves, so the idea was to give it a bit more mockery kind of character and all that kind of stuff, and Ardbeg occasionally does show that sort of character, so we'll see whether that indeed does. Now this is a very special bottling. This was a committee only bottling last year of the Supernova, so probably changing hands now for at least well over 3 figures, I would imagine, so be interesting to see. I have tasted earlier bottlings. I think I tasted the 09 and I think I tasted the 2010 bottling Supernova, and were very, very good, so that's got quite a bit to live up to. Then we're going to look at the last release that Ardbeg punted out, the Kildalton, named after the Kildalton cross. I believe a vatting of American oak and sherry matured whiskey, or spirit I should say. Tasted that a few months back for the first time. Yeah, I loved the nose, thought the palate was a bit and I've subsequently tasted it again sort of several times, and it's one of those whiskies that, I mean, I don't know whether it's me, whether it was where I tasted it, when I tasted it, but it always seems to be tasting different. Maybe it's, I don't know, probably just one of those things, I think. Probably just didn't show particularly well the first time I tasted it, but anyway. And the last 2 are current staples of the Ardbeg range, along with the classic 10. We have the Corryvreckan, named after the whirlpool off the coast of Islay, bottled at 57%. And finally we'll finish off with the fairly heavily sherried Uigeadail, which is bottled at 54.9. So there you have it. That's this afternoon's little lineup. So as we've got quite a few to get through, let's make a start with the 10-year-old then. Okay, so let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Lightly oily, lightly, it's actually got quite a sort of barley sweetness to it, with a sort of dusty kind of barley note. Dusty, dry peat, a little bit of coffee, a little bit of mocha in actual fact, like, you know, you half expect. touch of violets, some saltiness obviously. I think along with Springbank 10-year-old, the Ardbeg 10 is probably one of the most improved bottlings over the last few years. I mean, I must admit, I remember when I first started in this industry about 15 years ago, tasted both the 10 and the 16-year-old Ardbeg and wondered what all the fuss was about, you know, especially with the old 16, which is now going for silly money, but this has got just a lovely crisp freshness to it. Long gone are this sort of like the old woody sort of style of the distillery, but yes, you can argue that they've upped the peating level, but yeah, I don't think that hurts. But oh, it's a lovely nose, really crisp, fresh, quite a lot of barley as well. It's just balanced, it's really nicely balanced. I mean, it's fairly heftily peated, but it's not all about just the peat. Palate. Oh, that's a lovely finish. Dusty peat, coal dust. Really kind of gritty but soft at the same time. Not particularly medicinal, like I say, it's more on the drier spectrum of the peat. A little bit of oiliness, a little bit of tar, certainly on the aftertaste. But it starts off quite sweet actually, quite a fair amount of sweet barley. Nice balancing saline character, some fleshy fruit. Just an all-round absolutely lovely malt. I mean, yes, you know, it's not sort of like a you know, a huge peat monster, but there's a fair amount there, and it's all nicely balanced. It's not dominating by, you know, too much. I mean, yes, the peat is obviously a focal point. It's Ardbeg after all, but there's a lot of other things going on. Even a little bit of oak, you know, a little bit of coffee, toffee, vanilla. It's just nice, all rounded, and really, really pleasant. And although I think the price has gone up over the years, I still think it's you know, it's still pretty good value for money in actual fact. So yeah, good starter I think. Okay, and moving on to the Auravedes. Let's see whether these toasted ends give it any more vanilla-y, mockery kind of character. Definitely feels younger, crisper, with, again, quite a sort of sweet barley note, but not as full. It's a lot more toasty in actual fact. It just seems like the oak has kind of taken the edge off the fleshiness of the spirit, so it's a lot more linear, crisp. The peat is not as heavy as on the 10-year-old. It's a lot younger peat, and it's developing some nice kind of fleshy sweet notes actually, as it kind of opens up with an almost kind of refilly sherry sort of note, developing that sort of sweet, gritty, vanilla-y, dried fruit. That's nice actually. That's got a lovely grittiness to it, I think would be the word. But again, the sort of like the spirit has got lots of softness and saltiness and earthiness. Again, just all really nicely balanced. Not much more you can say really. Palate. You can taste that younger peat on the finish. It's sort of like a more bog myrtle-y, herbally kind of peat. A little bit of seaweed, then that drier, dustier, coal dust peat note kind of comes through on the right on the very end. Again, it's got that sort of gritty kind of tannin character, but also some nice sort of toffee, and again all quite nicely balanced up. It does have a lot of mocha character, certainly on the aftertaste. You only sort of go, chocolate, chocolate coffee, peat, yeah, that's kind of nice. Should make a chocolate bar out of that in actual fact. Yeah, can you imagine that? Ardbeg chocolate. Now that would be something. Combine a great spirit with some chocolate. Yeah, sounds good to me. So, yeah, I like that. That's impressive. Again, all really nicely balanced, and yeah, mockery. Okay, so let's move on to the Supernova. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Quite oily, very oily in actual fact, with some really dense toffee, sort of bonfire toffee, oily peat, tar, less of the coastal character, not as fresh as either of the first two bottlings. There's, yeah, a lot of oak going on here, and a little bit of grippy oak tannin and spice. The peat seems to be slightly below all of that. I mean, it's definitely there, and it's got that, again, that sort of earthy, dry, but also a slight medicinal character as well. So a completely different nose to the Auravedes and the 10-year-old. That's, again, yeah, that's nice. That's interesting. It's different. It's showing Ardbeg in a bit of a different light. So, colour. Again, oilier, but there's that little bit of sweet palm of violet, a little bit of coastal character coming through on the end, which is starting to just cleanse the palate. Not as heavily peated. I mean, it's maybe a sort of like possibly a throwback to the earlier days of Ardbeg when they weren't using quite so much peat, but it's certainly got a nice oily, dusty kind of character to it. Quite fleshy. I mean, the extra oils are certainly making it more fuller, and you're getting a real mouthful of sort of oily apricot, and lightly estery fruit as well, barley, and again a little bit of mocha, a little bit of cocoa. And yeah, that's nice. It's just very, very different. It's just an oilier. Maybe they took a slightly earlier cut. Who knows? Maybe they sort of slowed the distillation down a bit. Maybe it's just the way that particular batch had sort of like turned out. I mean, there's all these variations, and it's nice to sort of see, three very different bottlings. So yeah, that's good. Okay, on to the first of the three that contain a smidge of sherry cask. Let's see what the Kildalton gives us then, shall we? It has a nose very similar to the Supernova. Quite oily, coffeed, toffee. Quite heavy on the oak, which is kind of sitting above the peat. The peat is kind of quite dusty and dry. A little bit of dried fruit coming through from the sherry gives it a kind of a sort of a refill sherry kind of feel to it. Herbal, very herbal in actual fact. A little bit of olive possibly. more toffee. It's yeah, again, more oak. It's pleasant. Like I said, very similar in style to the Supernova, but with a little bit more dried fruit, a little bit more sherry character. Yeah, it's nice palate. Again, it finishes quite pleasant, quite salty, subtly peated, soft peat, dry, lightly Parma Violet finish. Kind of gets a little bit more astringent as the finish kind of like tapers off. But again, the start has a lot of oak. There's a lot of vanilla, coffee, dried fruit, and to be honest with you, I think it's my least favoured of the three. It just seems to lack something. I think the oak is just not deadening. Deadening is the wrong word. It's kind of just a little bit too forward on the palate. Certainly, it's quite forward on the nose, but not overly forward. I think the nose shows a really nice balance. I think the palate just doesn't quite live up to it, and it certainly is how when I tasted it the first time, and I didn't know what it was. It was obviously for the whiskey magazine, so the sample was just, you know, whiskey 46%. Yeah, it's 46%, isn't it? Yeah, it's 46%, and it's got a lovely aftertaste, lovely finish to it. It's just that initial impact is all a bit heavy on the oak, and it's a bit sort of clumsy. It's not the right word, but if you kind of you get my drift with this one, you know, it sort of like feels all a little bit subdued to sort of like start off with. Kicks in quite nicely on the middle and the finish, but just yeah, it's okay. Right, and on to the Corryvreckan. So, you're probably thinking, hang on, Corryvreckan, that never had any sherry in it. And it didn't, you know, and I was quite surprised when I tasted it for the World Whisky Awards to sort of find out that now some sherry has indeed crept into it. And subsequently I've tasted it again a couple of months ago. And indeed they have started vatting some sherry in, which was strange, but I mean, I suppose bottling's evolved. The original Corryvreckan was, you know, 100% American oak and just really intense, and it was just like being thrown into a whirlpool, you know. So let's see what the sherry element has done to it, shall we? Again, it's like a natural progression from the Supernova through the Kildalton. You can just feel the sherry element is coming up. There's more dried fruit. It's richer, maltier, darker, a little bit of treacle. But I think there's a little bit more peat going on here. It feels peatier, weightier, more oily, tarry kind of peat. Is it as fresh as it used to be? Well, no, it's not, because that sherry character is taking the edge off that. It's certainly not what it was. It's certain, and I don't know why they carried on calling it Corryvreckan when it's distinctly changed its character. I mean, it's a lovely malt in its own right. I think the balance between peat and the sherry is just about spot on. But it's not how it used to be. You know, Corryvreckan was like really young American oak, just like, whoa, my God, you know. Bit like the very young or the almost there or whatever. Toasty, coffeed. Again, quite a bit of mocha, but treacly and rich and dark. Almost sort of marmalade-y conserve kind of notes. Yeah, lovely balance, it has to be said. Lovely balance. Oh. Oh, still got that Corryvreckan kick at the finish, that sort of salty intensity, more so than the peat, but the peat is kind of like just sort of underneath all of that, with again that dusty kind of character to it. A lot more sherry character, a lot more dried fruits, conserve, chocolate, licorice, treacle, that kind of thing. But where the Kildalton kind of just all was a bit, this has just got some intensity that really bangs into the palate, cleans up all that sherry character, and gives you a lovely sort of dry, salty, nutty finish with the dusty peat kind of like lingering. Altogether, personally, I think that is a lot better balanced, even though it's more heavier on the sherry. It just has more personality, more character, more, you know. And whereas the Kildalton was what, I don't know, 3 figures. Corryvreckan is still just 2. So yeah, on that's good. I like that. That's really well balanced. Okay, so on to the final bottling, the Uigeadail. I suppose just coming back briefly to the Kildalton and the Corryvreckan. I mean, I suppose it does help that the Corryvreckan's bottled at what, 57%, whereas the Kildalton is only bottled at 46, and so that additional amount of alcohol certainly sort of helps give it a kick, and maybe that's what it needed. Maybe that's what the Kildalton needed. Maybe it needed to be bottled at, say, something closer to 50%. But it certainly seems that, well, we haven't done the Uigeadail yet, and the Uigeadail's at 54.9, that sort of Ardbeg seems to work best when using sherry at cask strength, possibly, you know, just to give it that, you know, intensity to kick through all the sherry character. But anyway, like I said, we've not done the Uigeadail, so let's see what this gives us. And again, it's a progression from the Kildalton moving upwards. More sherry, more treacle, more malt, more herbal character, both sort of seaweedy sort of character and sort of herbal oloroso kind of character. It's a brute, it has to be said, but it's earthy, it's manurey, it's elemental, but there's a lovely sweetness there as well, you know, from the sherry, almost grapey kind of sweetness, a bit of violet, dusty peat. And I think this is it. I think Ardbeg gets away with you know, using quite a fair amount of sherry, almost to a certain extent, like Bowmore does, because it has a lot more going on. It's not just like you go, sherry, yep. Not quite as conservy. There's a little bit of sort of almost marmaladey kind of note, but it's more about the raw oloroso with that sort of oily sheen to it. I mean, it's not sort of, you know, mega raw, but it has a sort of like a raw intensity to it. Pardon? That is a lovely finish. Again, hits the palate. You can tell it's got a lot more sherry, dried fruits, sultana, a little bit of raisin, lots of coffee, chocolate, dusty, intense peat. Yes, that alcohol again is really sort of helping clean up the finish, so it leaves the sort of like the peat, the coastal notes kind of coming through. But bonfirey, treacle toffee coated apples. I mean, that is just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, you know, some people say peat and sherry don't work together. Well, I think Uigeadail is a classic example to say that it certainly does work together really, really nicely, and neither is sort of overwhelming the other. It's all just really well balanced. A big mouthful, but again, I think it needed to be bottled at this strength. I think it needed to be bottled at 50+%, because I think if you bottle this at 46%, it just wouldn't have the intensity to sort of like balance out the sherry. It would, you know, just become a little bit too cloying, a little bit, maybe a little bit too sweet, you know, a bit too coating. But I think bottled at 54.9 just seems to be just about right for it. So yeah, good bottling to finish on, I think. Right, okay, so there you have it, Ardbeg in a nutshell. That's basically the three current distillery releases, and a handful or three of the special ones. So, you know, hopefully this has been, you know, a really interesting video. Certainly, like I said, starting off with a 10-year-old, all American oak. I mean, there's no sherry in that. No, none whatsoever. Lovely intensity, lightly oiled, really, really nice. Like I said, it's kind of, yeah, just so good now, that it's sort of like a whiskey that I often kind of come back to, and you know, enjoy. So yeah, great, really good. The Auravedes, well, yeah, I liked it. I mean, yes, certainly it would appear to have, you know, done exactly what they wanted it to do. You know, the heavily toasted ends are certainly added a little bit more sort of mockery, kind of gritty, tannic kind of character to it. And yeah, so interesting. It's a pity that the Brazilian team at the World Cup didn't show quite as much character, shall we say. But anyway, that's beside the point. Supernova, yeah, like that, very good. Oilier, softer, you know, just a difference. Not younger, but not quite so sort of coastally intense as, say, the previous two. And then we sort of moved into the sherry arena with the Kildalton. My least favoured, I think, of all of the 6 samples that I've tasted this afternoon with you. Not a bad bottling by any means. I was asked by a good friend of mine who found a bottle in a shop in London for, oh, I can't remember how much it was now. I think he said it was about 200 and something, I forget now, and said, is it worth it? And I said, nah, it isn't. I mean, yeah, well, I mean, you know, any of these sort of limited releases of Ardbeg is probably going to make you money, but I really wouldn't have forked out 3 figures for that particular one if I was going to drink it anyway. You know, if I was going to stick it in the collection and sell it, then maybe it's, you know, a bit of a no-brainer, I suppose, if you're collecting Ardbeg. But purely sort of like, you know, whether I was going to rate that at that kind of price point, I just can't. It's not, nothing wrong with it, it's just not great, you know. Corryvreckan, on the other hand, is good. It's really very, very good. Yes, again, it's gone up in price, so I forget what it is now. It's probably getting close to about 80 quid, but even so, that's just a fantastic whiskey. Even though it is not what it once was, it still has that sort of element of freshness and of the Corryvreckan whirlpool, but the sherry has kind of blunted it to a certain extent. I mean, it's still a lovely whiskey, don't get me wrong, but it is not Corryvreckan, it's not what it was. And it kind of gets on my nerves a little bit when distilleries start doing this, when they have a sort of particular bottling, and then they start playing around with it and doing different things to it, you know, because if you're going to do something different, just make a new bottling, you know, why, you know. Yeah, well, anyway, that's just me. And the Uigeadail, yeah, absolutely gorgeous, and just one of those sort of whiskies that kind of proves its point, the fact that sherry and peat do tend to go together, or can, not necessarily always, but in this instance certainly can work quite nicely together. Again, I think this is heading northwards of 80 odd quid a bottle, so it's not cheap, but it's definitely, if you like your big rich peated malts, then you know this is definitely one worth going for, I think. So so there you have it. That's today's episode of the show, brought to you by the letter A. And all that's left to say is I hope you enjoyed this episode of the show, and good dramming, and enjoy the rest of your bank holiday.